Okay, so I'm just going to do this on the fly. I have absolutely no preparation. The only thing is, I'm glad that Jeffrey put that on there, because I'm going to claim credit for the good performance of the Philippine economy from the 1890s to 1950 on behalf of my university, which is actually the reason that I'm in Michigan, right? Because as some of you might know, the first Philippine U.S. Secretary for the Philippines in 1898 was a professor at the University of Michigan, Dean Worcester, because when the Americans inherited the Philippines after the Spanish-American War, there was nobody in the U.S. who knew anything about the Philippines except Michigan professors who had been collecting specimens in the jungles here since the 1870s. So we have pictures of them. I have this picture I use in my class of the first American Michigan Study Abroad program in Asia, which is a bunch of white guys in hats and long beards and guns. Okay, it's like about 8 of them sitting down, because that's what you needed to collect, plant specimens, etc. In Asia. So that was the first. So Dean Worcester went out in 1898, came out to Philippines and was there for a long time. Over the years, a lot of our professors went out there, came out here. I guess I shouldn't be having an American mindset. And the last U.S. Governor General of the Philippines was also from Michigan. Had 3 degrees. He was a JD, BA, Frank Murphy, right? Frank Murphy, yeah. And he came from Harbor Beach, Michigan, and was a U.S. Supreme Court Justice who died in 1949. Okay. Yes. Okay. And he was also so the reason that University of Michigan has this fabulous collection on Southeast Asia, because our professors been going out there during that period of time. And so when I'm from Singapore, was looking to do graduate work, that was the first place that you would go to, because from the base of the Philippines collection that we had, museum collection, all kinds of, we developed Southeast Asia in general. So that's just to try and fill up my time slot. Okay, next, to say something a little bit more serious, I did do some research in the Philippines around the early 80s. And my work was on the multinational electronics firms in Malaysia and Singapore. And I did some comparative work in the Philippines and went up to, Texas Instruments and Baguio and people in this area and did some interviews. And followed up a little bit afterwards. And I think that's really interesting. That's just an industry. So I'm going to give a corporate comparative perspective on the Philippine growth, or why the Philippines never took off like all the other Asian countries did, including Malaysia and Singapore and even Thailand, from being one of the early comers, one of the first comers, actually in labor-intensive electronics assembly. Everybody else moved on from that and moved up the value chain, became more capital-intensive, got bigger and bigger shares of global market, moved from semiconductors to hard disk drives, to all kinds of telecommunications. As you know, that's the single largest industry, electronics, in Southeast Asia. And most recently, DJ mentioned I'm on the board of a tech company that manufactures a lot in China, and we were looking at how to expand beyond China, mainly for risk purposes. And the 3 places we looked at were Thailand, Malaysia. This is like this year. Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Philippines not even on the radar. Okay? So what are the reasons for that from a corporate perspective? And I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with that. And that is when multinational corporations and even other Asian corporations look at the Philippines, they are concerned about security. political risk. Corruption you have everywhere, okay? So it's just different. But security, political risk is seen as higher, infrastructure is seen as inferior, and education and skills is really interesting because Filipinos have very good education and skills. That's why they're working everywhere else, and they're disproportionately among the managers in companies that I've looked at in Thailand and Indonesia. Even in Malaysia and Singapore. There's a lot of disproportionate number of Philippine managers. So I think from a corporate perspective, Philippines needs to reduce risk and increase productivity, which is not just labor productivity, but total productivity, which includes infrastructure, regulatory environment, all kinds of things. And this will benefit, if it improves this environment, infrastructure, policy, etc., it will benefit domestic as well as international companies, okay? Because it's not a policy just for multinationals. That said, I think the prospects for the Philippine economy are good. Macroeconomic management has been healthy. Before there was always concerns with inflation, budget deficits, etc., and the Philippines has actually done rather well, and that has got good momentum going forward. It has been more focused on domestic consumption relative to other Asian countries, and that's now all the fad. Those of you who might have gone to my lecture yesterday for domestic rebalancing, the Philippines has actually had quite a lot of domestic consumption. Some people think it's too much, and that the remittances, for example, should have been channeled into investment rather than building these McMansions, right? They should have been. No, McMansions is a consumption good, but if you had invested it back in, productive facilities, that might have been better. I think Philippines is in a very good position right now because its regional economies are booming. It's particularly close to China. And ASEAN economies are booming, so its prospects of exporting to regional economies as well as domestic consumption are quite good. I guess that's about, I would say that in the time that I've studied Southeast Asian economies, this is the best time, right? For the last 20 or 30 years of the Philippine economy. Just looks a lot better when you compare it with the others. Its foreign investment inflow is still small relative to everybody else. I think I absolutely loved Professor Williamson's talk because I agree with that. I think that Philippine, when you do get more jobs at home, skilled jobs at home, Filipinos will return. They may be less likely to return from the US than they are from other countries for a variety of reasons. But I can see them returning from Indonesia, from Thailand, etc., sort of the more from Singapore, etc., for a variety of reasons that we can discuss. And of course, not going out to the extent that they have. So I'll just stop there, and I can answer. I'm probably better at answering questions than like making up stuff as I go along.